module is all about on-road bicycle facilities. And once again, we're going to focus on kind of best practice, what we would love to see across our network, and then talk about pragmatic solutions as well. So where you're unable to achieve those results, what else can you do to help improve the situation, but not necessarily getting that gold standard in there. Just a few photos that I just wanted to share from the previous module about shared paths. Had this sent in from a previous participant about a shared path that was near them. And here's a pretty good example of where you've got a narrowed shared path because of those signposts, creating that pinch point, which is quite uncomfortable. And another photo that they sent us is this, which is, I just think it's a kind of a rule of thumb. If you can't fit the stencil for your pedestrian and bicycle symbol, then it's probably too narrow a path. So this one is a little bit of a strange example. The other thing that we were discussing in the previous module was that idea of how can we slow cyclists down as they approach conflict points or things like that. And I mentioned that transverse like rumble strips, and I just thought I'd show you an example of that. So those bars, they run across the bicycle path there, and as you can see, as a cyclist kind of rides towards that, they're getting close together, and they provide that haptic warning that a cyclist is approaching a crossing point. So that's just another tool that can be used to help raise awareness of those types of things. Hopefully everyone managed to watch the 360-degree footage. So we had two examples of shared paths crossing over roads or carriageways. And we'll actually launch our first poll for the day. So even if you didn't get a chance to review the footage, you can just use the snips that we've got here. Question will be, hopefully, are you okay to launch that, Marissa? We've just got...
Sorry, my polls weren't working.
Oh, your poll's not working? That's okay.
No, it is now. That's okay. Module 2, poll 1?
Yeah. So we've got these two different scenarios, two different examples of shared paths crossing roads. Example 1 on the left, example 2 on the right. Question is, which example shows best practice design for a shared path crossing a road? I'll give you 20 seconds to have that go with that one. Alrighty. So no stress if you didn't get to this. You don't get marked on this polls inside the webinars, but we might just stop there and we can share the results. And it looks like example 1 is being seen as the preferred, which I agree with. The reason for that is in example 1, we've got that raised crossing point. So shared path users are able to cross there with priority, and they don't need to worry about stopping and giving way to vehicles, as opposed to example 2, where it's just the shared path ends and there's an expectation that cyclists will just have to pick a gap in traffic and cross over there because motorists have right of way. So we certainly love to see our conflict points raised and also priority awarded to our vulnerable road users or our shared path users. So good to see that that is the overwhelming majority there. So as I mentioned, today's session will all be about on-road facilities. So where we are unable to use off-road, well away from the carriageway, we just don't have that land available, or we've got specific constraints, meaning that we need to use the actual carriageway. This is where this module will come in handy. The things that we'll be talking about in quite a bit of detail the idea of protected bicycle lanes. So this is really a strong and important part of the cycling network, and where cyclists tend to feel most confident is within protected bicycle lanes. So something that we're really proud to advocate for and love to see more of them across our networks. We'll also talk about how traditional on-road bicycle lanes leave cyclists in quite a precarious position and the risks associated with that, and discuss, if you were unable to install protected bicycle lanes, what other types of treatments can be implemented to help mitigate the risk. It's by no means as desirable as a treatment as a protected bicycle lane, but they still do offer some degree of benefit. The final part of today, we'll be discussing the mixed traffic, or where cyclists aren't required to, ride in their specific lane. It's where they share the carriageway with general traffic. And we'll talk about exactly how you can manage those situations. All right, so a protected bicycle lane, for those not familiar with the term, conventionally, the way that we have built our transport networks is, if we've got the footpath here, we would tend to put our parking lane right adjacent to the footpath or next to the curb and channel there. And then we would put our bicycle lane adjacent that parked lane. So the inherent risk with that historical cross-section is that you've got cyclists riding in the dooring zone space, so where driver vehicle doors are opening. That's traditionally where the bicycle lane has been put, so you've basically created that dooring risk. And the other significant risk is cyclists are also adjacent to live traffic lane. So if vehicles are veering out of their lane, they could be distracted, they could be on their mobile, they could be, turning around and looking at the kids fighting in the back seat or something like that, and for a split second veering out of their traffic lane, and that's where the bicycle lane has been. So just the that kind of configuration leads to higher risks, where you've got more exposure for cyclists, and both during collisions and collisions with moving traffic. Now, a protected bicycle lane actually flips this arrangement around. So it brings cyclists from that precarious position into a protected facility. Now, the way that this is actually protected, or this separator that is used, it does vary. So I've got quite a lot of examples in today's webinar where we'll go through what can be used to provide that separation. But the general consensus is we're moving away from the dooring zone. We are pulling cyclists closer to the curb and channel, providing some degree of separation, and then having your parked car lane or the live traffic lane, whatever is currently there. So really, really important thing to improve safety for cyclists is the installation of these protected bicycle lanes. Now, the other thing that I really like about this particular example is the width of the facility. So you can see clearly here we've got two cyclists riding two abreast, which is quite a common scenario. Cycling can be quite social, where you may want to have conversations with, any of your cycling partners. But the other key benefit of having this width is if this is utilized by cyclists who may be traveling at slower speeds, it could be cargo bikes or, children riding their bikes or things like that, versus the higher speed cyclist, this allows for overtaking. So if this is a very narrow facility, so if that separator was brought right in there, and it's only wide enough for one cyclist, you kind of run the risk that faster traveling cyclists may, not have the space to overtake, and potentially overtake in a very dangerous, squeezed up position and have issues with cyclists. Or you'll get those faster riding cyclists not using this facility at all because they don't want to get stuck behind. So I really like this where you've got that width available so you can safely cater for 2 cyclists riding 2 abreast. Now, before we get into all the details of the protected bicycle lane, just a bit of a reflection on why we would be advocating for this. The City of Melbourne conducted a study for not just cyclists, but general people within the community about how they felt riding in different cycling facilities. And the protected bicycle lane, 83% of people said that they felt comfortable or confident riding in that environment, which is quite a significant number. Our on-road bicycle lanes next to that dooring zone was only 22%. So when we are talking about our strategic cycling corridors or our bicycle highways or things like that, at a strategic level, we are thinking about providing safe access for a range of demographics, not just for those that feel super confident. So the kind of rhetoric that's used within this space is designing for cyclists aged between 8 and 80. And this protected bicycle lane is much more appealing for those within that demographic. And also you can see by the results that have been conducted as part of this survey that people just generally feel a lot safer riding in that, which means you'll be able to see a much larger uptake of cycling if those protected bicycle lanes are prioritized. So lots and lots of good positives there. Now, there are 2 main configurations for protected bicycle lanes. One is what is just referred to as a one-way path, where you've basically just got a mirror image of the carriageway. So you've got this protected bicycle lane here, some form of separation between the bicycle facility and the parking lane, and then that is mirrored on the other side of the carriageway. This is probably the most common arrangement where you've just got one-way facilities on both sides. So cyclists can only travel in one direction on either side of the road. Here's just an example of how this may look. Question for the group, and we'll give a prize out for the first person who can answer this one. You can see that these separators being used here have got this gap in the middle there. My question is, why would we be putting in that gap? Wow. Okay. Let's see lots of answers coming through there. Yes, the correct answer is stormwater or drainage. So I'll let Marissa have a look through the chat there to see if they can find a winner. But basically, yeah, if this was all one solid curb and channel, and during storms or heavy rainfall and things like that, you just have pooling water all here, which would then, create issues for people accessing the car parks. So instead of having to rebuild your drainage network and install new pits and pipes and things like that, it's just a lot easier to allow for these breaks and let the water flow off and use your existing drainage line. So that's just a really, really common construction tip. The other main configuration that you'd be employing for protected bicycle lanes are bi-directional paths. So rather than have both sides of the carriageway utilized by a protected facility, you would instead allow cyclists to travel in both directions on one side of the carriageway. So in this example, you can see cyclists using just one side of the carriageway, but traveling in both directions. Now, the benefit of this approach is you actually are saving on a little bit of space, because previously you provided 2 of those separators, which could be 1 meter or 1.5 meters in width. Now you're only doing it on one side, And as we know, our carriageway cross sections are incredibly constrained and limited, and we do have to think about how we can maximize the use of our space. And in those scenarios, this is generally where a bi-directional facility may be investigated and looked into, where you just don't have that roadway availability to be able to do it on both sides. Marissa.
Max, with the drainage openings in the curb, is there a guide or standard on how often these should be placed to avoid too high of a concentration water overflow to the bike lane?
It's a good question. I'm certainly not aware of minimum spacing, but if there's any drainage experts out there that would suggest what would be appropriate, I'm more than happy to open that up to the group. I would, yeah, you don't want to see long sections of this where there's just nowhere for the water to escape. Otherwise, you will have that pooling effect. But as to an exact dimension, I can't tell you at the top of my head, sorry. Catherine.
Yeah, Max, just a few questions around this on-road separated facility. Just with vehicles, what about for vehicles turning into the road? It is an additional conflict point, and there are some examples out there where that is an issue on the network. So yeah, just some, your thoughts on that one.
It's a good point. So yes, there is a conflict issue and also a sightline issue. So if there was a vehicle parked in this bay here and another vehicle was trying to turn into this driveway like that, that parked vehicle can actually create a sightline issue for cyclists, so an inability to see cyclists within the protected bicycle lane. I still would highly regard the safety benefits of the protected bicycle lane far outweighing that risk associated there. You know, in a perfect world, you just remove all conflict points and you wouldn't have any of those issues, but we do have driveways, access streets, you know, minor legs and things like that that need to be maintained. So instead, rather than trying to focus on the removal of those conflict points, you try and open up these sight lines. So pushing that car park bay a little bit further back. So as a vehicle is turning in, they've got better opportunity to sight any cyclists. And also providing gaps in these bays as well. So rather than just have one long length of car park bays, you've got gaps at a time so you can make eye contact with each other.
Yeah, great, thanks, Max. And also, I guess in a ideal world, we want to be rolling these out across the network, but we're retrofitting existing road environments. So I guess the question is, like, whilst it's like great for greenfield, what discretions are noted for the retrofitting existing developments to implement a protected bike lane?
So there is lots of literature and guidance. So feel free to use the all the guidance documents that we provide within our references on the LMS to help support you and your jurisdiction to implement these types of features. But as I said, we do know that the safety benefits associated with these outweigh the other risks that can occur with those sightline issues.
And I guess with strategic cycling corridors as well, like if we can target those, that would be great. But understand there's existing constraints. So, but yeah, the safety definitely outweighs the challenges of trying to fit it in. Also, I guess like bin day, the logistics of separated facilities and the challenges of domestic activities that happen on the network. I guess challenges around that bin day.
Great question. Yeah, let's give a prize out there, because that is a really, really common issue that we are faced with. How is garbage collection maintained? The way that I've seen it done, that I think is a very good approach, is obviously making sure that all residents are aware of any changes that may be occurring outside their street or their nature strip or anything like that. ensuring that they're completely aware of how this garbage collection will be maintained. In terms of what you can do on the ground to help support this, you can actually look to create little bin bays and actually demarcate that, with paint, and tell your residents, okay, there's going to be little painted sections where you put your bin, and just make it as unequivocal as that. It is a change, and with any change, there's going to be a little bit of engagement required, but once again, I wouldn't see that as being a showstopper.
And I guess just for other users using the protected bicycle lane, Max, so e-scooters and I guess Uber motorcyclists.
Yeah,
I mean, we certainly see it in Melbourne.
absolutely. So
yeah,
I tend to see e-scooters and e-bikes and all that wonderful micro mobility. I tend to see them as more fitting within this space because they are more similar to bicycles as opposed to putting them on a footpath. I don't think that they're a good mix there with pedestrians. So I tend to agree that, they should be able to use the protected bicycle lanes. Perhaps in the future, we wouldn't call them protected bicycle lanes. We may just call them protected, transport mode lanes or something like that. But yeah, there's plenty of arguments going around that, what exactly should we be doing with them, and should they even belong on our network? And yeah, I personally, I see them as an inevitable part of the network. So I don't think there's much point arguing that they're not going to belong here or not going to be here, because lots of cities all around the world have started to adopt them and are catering for them. So I think we should also be following suit.
And just some thoughts on your effectiveness of the on-road protected cycle lane compared to a shared use path.
Yeah, so if your shared use path was, well and truly away from the carriageway, and you've really minimized the instances where they may be able to conflict with general traffic, then that is by far going to be the best outcome. But most of our built-up network is just not going to be able to accommodate that, without having to shut down roads and things like that, which, if that's a possibility, then by all means, it's worth investigating. But in terms of like an actual percentage of, what would the crash reduction factor be? I haven't got those types of statistics, but yeah, I would certainly be going for off-road if you do have that provision.
Yeah, certainly. And just one more for you, Max, so we can get going. Isn't there a concern with the bi-directional lane on one side where it crosses the intersections because motorists aren't expecting cyclists coming from both directions?
Yes, and we'll give a prize out there because they've obviously got some psychic energy, and that is a talking point in just a few slides' time. So well done.
Right. Thank you. Cheers, Max.
Yeah, so the bi-directional, as I mentioned, this is where you've got cyclists traveling both directions on one side of the carriageway. Most effective where, you've got a really constrained carriageway width that you're working with, and also where you've got all the major attractions for cyclists on one side of the carriageway. So if you've got your train station and then it connects to a university, as an example, and both of them are on that side of the carriageway, it may be worth, just saying, well, that's really where the demand is, so that's where I'm going to put the cyclist facilities. So there's that kind of strategic look at it as well. Here's an example of a bidirectional path, and this one looks a little bit different. You may notice that the separator that is being used is much narrower. Prize in the chat for the person that can tell me why this example may have a narrower separation. Oh, very good. Yep, I can see lots of no parking being listed, and it could also be site constraints. I do agree with that. But the answer that I'm looking for is no parking here. So in this instance, this is actually a through road and vehicles are not permitted to stop and park. which means you don't have that dooring risk. So we don't need to worry about creating such a wide separator. In a perfect world, of course, we'd love to see as much separation as possible, but it's less important where you don't have that dooring risk. So that's very acutely picked up. We've included this table here just to summarize, I suppose, the pros and cons of going with either a one-way protected bicycle lane or a bidirectional. And rather than just read through this table, I'll just spell it out with some figures, but this is just for your references, so you can reflect on this later on. The concerns that we have with bidirectional lanes is if we think about motorists that are exiting a minor leg or a driveway or a car park or whatever it is. So we're focused on this vehicle here exiting. And intuitively, they are focused on oncoming traffic. This is a one-way street. So their line of sight is focused purely on the vehicles that's coming towards them and picking a gap in the traffic. Okay, that's fairly intuitive. To some extent, cyclists traveling in that direction would be within their line of sight, perhaps in their periphery, but more or less, you know, you'd hope that they'd be able to see them. Cyclists in the opposing direction are not really overly, it's not really part of the driver's thinking to be looking both directions where you're exiting in these types of environments, purely because they're focused on the oncoming traffic and looking for a gap in the traffic. And that's really what their focus is. The cyclist coming from the other direction is just not a priority, and it's not really where they'll be looking either. Now, the other example that was suggested before is where you've got a right turning vehicle into an intersection. And it's once again that same kind of idea where this right turning vehicle would be looking straight ahead of them and looking for a gap in traffic to perform that right turn movement. To some extent, you would think that they would be able to sight cycling traffic that's going oncoming, but cyclists that are traveling in the same direction, which is the cyclists in that yellow circle, they are practically hidden and incredibly difficult for right-turning motorists to be able to see. Now, that is one of the disadvantages with your bidirectional facilities. By no means am I saying that you shouldn't do them and you can't ever possibly implement this treatment. What you can do to help mitigate this as a particular risk, if you've got the carriageway space particularly, is see how in this example, there's like this little bay here. So a right-turning vehicle would be able to pick a gap in traffic, perform their right turn movement, enter this little bay, pause again, give way to the cyclists within that facility, and then cross over to enter the minor leg. So just having that little opportunity to hold, get away from the general traffic, the carriageway, and then rather than have to think about two sets of conflict points, you just distilled it into, I'll think about the cars and then I'll think about the cyclists. So that's a really good approach to be able to do. I'd also advocate for creating some kind of surface change in that little bay area. So maybe using cobblestones or something like that. Just so as motorists are turning right, they are completely cognizant that, you know, there's something has really changed here and I need to slow down and give way. Okay, I'll talk now about the separators and what can be used for protected bicycle lanes. Now, we tend to think of our separators as looking something like this, and this is also referred to as a Copenhagen bicycle lane. This is, you know, a wonderful facility, but it can be quite expensive, particularly if you're using things like bluestone curbing or asphalt for your infill or concrete or things like that. It can be quite an expensive exercise. So I did want to just have a discussion around what are other separating treatments to make sure that, you know, if you are, as we all do, have budget constraints, what else can we do to ensure we're getting bang for our buck? But before I get into that, I will just have a quick conversation around those curb profiles. As I mentioned on Wednesday, we do have two main, well, we've got three main barrier profiles, but I'll just focus on two here. One of our curb profiles has just got like a vertical face to it, and that's referred to as a barrier curb. And the other one looks something relative to that, which is referred to as a semi-mountable curb. And the way that we like to see our protected bicycle lanes installed is we like to have a barrier curb installed where the parking lane is adjacent and something that is semi-mountable adjacent the bicycle lane. So just to take you through that on the images, on the left-hand side image, I've got a barrier curb both on the bicycle lane and the parking lane. So it gets the cross for the bicycle lane. In the middle image there, I've got a semi-mountable curb for the bicycle lane where it gets the tick, but gets the cross for the parking lane. And the final image is, you know, ideally what we'd love to see, where we've got a semi-mountable curb for the bike lane and a barrier curb for the parking lane. The reason that you'd be trying to implement this specific arrangement is the semi-mountable is just more forgiving. So if a cyclist is colliding with this semi-mountable, they're much more likely to be able to stay on their bike as opposed to a barrier curb. And for that exact same reason, you don't want to apply that to a parking lane, because motorists will find it a lot easier to be able to mount that facility and then access the separator. Now, we do have some examples of that occurring in the real world. So this is an example of a protected bicycle lane where the semi-mountable curb profile has been adopted on the bicycle lane, but it's also been used on the parking lane side as well. And what you can see here, and might be clear in the following image, is vehicles very, very commonly are able to access the separator facility and park on the separator. And that's not what you want to occur. If instead this had been a barrier profile, that would have to some degree helped reduce that as a risk. Now, the reason that we're talking about this as a risk is because all of this infrastructure is designed to house an open door. So if the door swings open, it's not going to swing into the bicycle lane, or it's going to be slightly reduced. The closer that this door is to the bicycle lane, or, you know, the closer they're able to park to the bicycle lane, the less and less effective the protected bicycle lane is. So just one way that you can help mitigate that as a risk is to really think about your curb profiles and applying the barrier curb where the parking lane is. Now, of course, you will see some motorists just, you know, making their own decisions about where they will park and what they believe they are able to do within a bicycle lane. And that is absolutely part and parcel of a network kind of everywhere. It's part of the culture, unfortunately. I don't think any curb profile is really going to help reduce the risk of this type of behavior. It's just, you know, hopefully focusing on the positives of projects and getting lots of good education and campaigns as part of delivering any of your protected bicycle lanes, and yeah, seeing less and less of this. This one is just what it looks like, you know, at nighttime, where you can actually see both of those profile types, just in case that wasn't clear. But just to reiterate, that is the barrier curb profile, and you can see both of those sides is a semi-mountable. The other thing to think about when you are delivering protected bicycle lanes is if you've got any disability car parking spaces, how will their access be maintained? Because as you can appreciate, if you were marking this as a separated treatment all the way through, you've significantly reduced the ability for those people accessing those car parks to, safely be able to travel between the park and the footpath. So this is just a reminder that if you are working within this space, you will need to provide gaps adjacent your disabled car parking bays. You'll have to have a think about how you're going to bring them to the curbside. That could be at dedicated points, likely through the use of curb ramps. And also you might want to implement some type of treatment so it's clear where people accessing those bays, where do they actually cross the protected bicycle lane, both for the perspective of the cyclist, so they know where that conflict point exists, and also just to help those traveling to and from the cars that they have that ability to see where they should be crossing that. So that's, in this example, highlighted using this yellow paint, but different jurisdictions would manage that differently. Marissa?
Max, we've just had a comment or a question. I've seen a lot of sites where parking wheel stops are used as a barrier curb. Is this considered an acceptable option?
So I have also seen that, and I think that the wheel stops generally work quite well with most passenger vehicles, but for those that are in four-wheel drives, they can quite easily, get over the top of those things and not even feel it. Like it's an absolute tiny little bump in the road. I do see them as adding value, and I wouldn't be one to say uniformly, no, we shouldn't do them, because we continue, we've seen these fail in certain instances. If you were having an entire section where, every single park bay is being driven over and the wheel stop is being completely ignored, then perhaps that specific product is not fit for purpose, but I wouldn't be solely against the use of them.
I'm not, you might know what this question is in relation to, if it's a slide or maybe the previous question. Would this be a similar treatment for loading bays?
Yes, it would be. So that would be appropriate for this slide as well. So just, clearly demarcating where those in loading bays would be accessing the adjacent footpath, and hopefully defining a clear conflict point for cyclists as well.
And just more of a comment and observation, also accommodating for buses and bus layovers as well. Max,
Yes.
There's certainly a lot of that on the network.
Absolutely, yep. And there's this idea of a floating bus stop as well. I don't think I'd talk about it in this slide, but yeah, it's just, there's lots of treatments that you need to think about if you are engaged with buses or public transit.
Cheers.
So yeah, as I said, this yellow kind of box is just what's shown in this particular example. I'll show you kind of a real example of this, where across the bicycle lane is just a tiny little zebra crossing. So I might just zoom in on that so you've got a bit of a clearer idea of it. But I think zebra crossings are very effective. It's generally quite well understood what they mean, because they're, even if you're not from Australia or New Zealand or wherever you're from, they are used internationally to demarcate pedestrian areas. So I think they do a very good job at highlighting conflict points. The issue that I've got with this specific example is if you were a pedestrian trying to cross here, there's no curb ramps. So you're kind of walking along the footpath and then have to step down onto the carriageway and then step back up to get to the bus stop, which is not a great outcome. Once again, if you were able to install like a wombat crossing, which is just a raised pedestrian crossing point or a raised zebra crossing, that could have been installed at this location, that, you know, would have once again highlighted the conflict point and also slowed down cyclists as they're entering that position. And just caught my eye then as well. See those little yellow lines? Those are another example of those transverse rumble strips. So it's once again being implemented to give cyclists a bit of warning that they're approaching a conflict point. All right, back to our separators now. So we do have a raft of different products available to us that can help provide that protected facility. As I mentioned before, you'd be using these narrow separators where you don't have parked traffic adjacent, because you don't have to worry about that opening door. You know, if you've got the space, by all means, increase the width, but generally we don't have the space. So this is where you could be implementing your narrow separators. These type of treatments are quite good in that they are bolt down type of concrete curbs, meaning, you know, if you weren't 100% sure if this infrastructure is going to be accepted by the community, you could roll this out as a trial and suggest that, you know, we're just going to give this a go for a period. It could be of 6 months, or it could be during specific, you know, events on as part of, I don't know, it could be a big football match that's on, or it could be a carnival that's being held, and you know you're going to get lots of cycling traffic through here. So this could just be used as an interim solution. But because it's bolt down, very quick and easy to install and also to remove. So I think the idea of these bolt downs are a good suggestion. Planter boxes have also been used for separation as well. Now, there's a bit of a catch-22 with using planter boxes. They can definitely liven the streetscape and make things look a lot prettier, which I'm all for. I'm very much a green thumb and love to see plants and flowers in our carriageways. But the issue being that it may look very pretty on day one, but as time progresses, you may have issues with, you know, plants getting significantly large or dying off and shedding all their leaves, and all of that just debris ending up in the bicycle lane, which will create issues. And the other issue that you may have with planter boxes is, remember how we talked about that pedaling strike risk? Anything that's kind of above that 200 mil mark could be hit by a cyclist's pedal. That can include planter boxes. So you can have cyclists actually running into those things, which could be a bit annoying. Here's just another example of planter boxes, and also these kind of like speed humps, I guess you could call them, being used to demarcate the protected bicycle lane. Any idea where this photo is taken? Does anyone recognize that big tower? It is in Auckland. Well done. Federal Street in Auckland, and also at the intersection they did a bit of tactile urbanism work just to help do some traffic calming and, you know, let motorists know that they're in a slightly different environment here. This is probably an example where you can see that planter box has already been struck, and you know, you've just got that soil there lying on the carriageway, and who's actually going to go and dig that up and have to, you know, rectify that? It's a bit of a, might be stuck there for a while yet. Marissa.
Thanks. A comment or question from Nicole. Something we discovered after we installed protected bike lanes in Geelong is that parking signs need to be installed within 3 meters of a parking bay to be enforceable. This meant relocating existing parking signs from behind curb to the buffer between the bike lane and parking bays. Not ideal. Interested to hear if there is another option.
I'm certainly not aware of another option. I think that's a pretty good lesson to share with those that could be working within this space. It just seems like a peculiarity within the road rules. So perhaps during you know, you're doing detailed design and getting survey out there, taking measurements of where all your existing parking restriction signs are and making a calculation of exactly where the new parking facilities will be and showing on the plans all of those relocations. So it's just one of those, you know, I guess things that you learn with in hindsight and could make the project work a bit smoother in the future. But yeah, it's quite a detailed finding there. I don't think there's another way around it.
Sorry, thanks, Max. We've just had John comment. It said, try using parking area signage.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
Thanks.
Another question for the group is, we've got this type of separated treatment as well, and it's got a very peculiar name. It is named after a specific animal. Any idea what that product may be called?
Jeez. Graham was quick off the mark there. Armadillos.
Armadillo is correct.
Yes.
So we'll give a prize out there to Graham.
I love bumblebees. That's a good one.
I like bumblebees as well. I think it should
Yes.
be bumblebees, but just a
That's
reminder,
great.
that is what the armadillo looks like. They are not that common in Australia. There's a few examples over in Western Australia in Fremantle, but they are used in North America. There's some pros and cons with this type of separated treatment. A pro is it's made of 100% recycled plastic, which is pretty good. So if you've got any you know, environmental objectives as part of your projects, that can help kind of tick that box, and obviously very good outcome. But the disbenefit with this is it is very low to the ground, and in this example a black and white version is used. This is called a zebra, this type of coloring, and it's just incredibly difficult to see. So it's really common for motorists just to track straight over these things, and particularly, you know, at corners and things like that, cutting over the corner, because it doesn't provide that same level of separation as some of the other treatments that we've had. So yeah, I'm not ruling them out, but probably not as effective as other treatments that we've seen. Now, the ones that I do like are separated treatments that have got some degree of vertical nature to them. So typically the use of paddles or, you know, flexible bollards, really good idea, because it just, once again, helps raise that awareness of the separation between the protected bicycle lane and the carriageway. And, you know, you could have gone with the approach of going all the way through there in one single line, but having this angled here and providing these gaps does allow for a little bit improved sight lines between the motorist traveling and, yeah, the cyclist there. So that's another option you consider. Here's another example of those flexible bollards being used. So this specific site, this was installed during COVID, during the pop-up bicycle lanes. They were just becoming more and more prevalent during the COVID pandemic. And previously, this was a 3-lane traffic scenario, 3 lanes each way, so 6 lanes in total. And one of the traffic lanes got eaten up by this pop-up bicycle lane. It's just such a big improvement. What used to occur here was cyclists did have a on-road bicycle lane, and then it just ended. And you can't see it here, but this is crossing over a bridge. And there's just a super narrow section where pedestrians and cyclists kind of shared, even though it was far too narrow to be recommending that, because there was just nowhere else for cyclists to go. And yeah, during COVID, they decided to take one of those traffic lanes, award cyclists a protected facility all the way through here, and it is a much better arrangement for cyclists, much more comfortable to ride with that consistent you know, facility all the way through there as well. Now, yeah, I can imagine for those that have worked in any of the congestion or signal space, you may be thinking about the level of service of this type of treatment. And just from perspective, I would say that prior to this being implemented, this area would have got a level of service F. It's terribly congested. And after this treatment was installed, it still receives a level of service F and it's still congested. So it's just an incredibly busy area, part of the network. And if you are looking at your strategic cycling corridors and you're trying to prioritize cycling safety, I am for one, I do think that can come at the cost of things like congestion, and it can come at the cost of things like just give traffic as many lanes as they like, because that's going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve the problem. So yeah, as I said, if you've identified specific areas of your networks where you think this is where it's most critical for us to implement cycling infrastructure, then I do believe that can come at the cost of other transport modes within that space. I'll go through one more slide and then I might pause for a break. So just one last separated treatment that I've got here. This one is just like a flexible bollard without any, anything else on the carriageway pavement there. And it's a little bit of a strange one because this adjacent lane is a clearway. So at some stages of the day, parking is permitted. And, as I said before, where there is parking, you ideally want to have a greater separation so you don't have opening vehicle doors, opening into the space of the cyclist. So it hasn't quite nailed that brief. I'm not a big fan of this particular treatment, and I can also confirm that these bollards are struck incredibly often by motorists. So yeah, just another consideration for you there. I might pause there, Marissa and Catherine, and I'll give everyone, let's do a 5-minute break this time. So if you come back, go get a glass of water, a cup of tea, go do a stretch, whatever you'd like, come back in 5 minutes and we'll continue this session. Welcome back, everyone. I'll check in with Marissa and Catherine if I've missed any questions that have popped up.
Hello, welcome back. Yes, I thought a very good question popped up about resurfacing roads and separated facilities and the challenges of that.
Yeah, right. That is a good question. So I can't say I've got specific examples that I can think of with maintenance associated after the intervention has been put in place. Typically, you would get your surface defects rectified, then install your protected facility. Once you've done that, it's probably a pretty low risk that you're going to have significant pavement defects, because now you've only got bikes riding across that facility, unless you've got like trees, uprooting underneath or things like that. But I would think that it's a pretty small risk. But yeah, generally from what I've seen from construction point of view is you'd rectify your surface defects, across the carriageway, but specifically within the cyclist zone, and then provide the protection. And then, hopefully you're not going to see significant potholing or anything going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, no, good. Thank you. And just in regards to flexible bollards and the reflective tape and the visibility of them, I guess they get knocked around a bit and dirty and dusty where the reflectivity is probably not as effective as what it was when it was installed. So I guess just an observation of that and maintenance of those flexible bollards.
Yep, I think that's a fair observation, something that is relevant. That certainly does occur.
Yeah. Thanks, Max.
No worries. We shall continue, and we'll move away from our protected facilities now and get into the on-road bicycle lanes, and that time of day again where I ask the question, what's wrong with this photo? You can see a very, very confused looking Ken there. I'll get him out of the way. What risks do you see in this photo here? I'll give you 20 seconds to pop down your answers in the chat.
Where is this one, Max?
This is St Kilda Road.
Oh, okay. There you go. Yes.
Doesn't look like this anymore though.
No, that's right.
Mm.
I love a before and after.
Yeah.
Right, lots of issues with this one. Dooring, a good pick up there with people in the cycle lane.
Mm. Saw a pavement color color is fading as well. Very good. Bike is worth less than 10,000. Wow. Go. Okay. Certainly the risks that I would consider the highest there is that dooring risk. So good to see that that has come through. Marissa, I'll let you pick out. Let's go number 3 this time, because I feel like number 1 typers just incredibly good, but can't forget those that are a little bit slower at typing. So the number 3 person that said dooring, Marissa, will give them a prize. And we'll also give a prize to the person that noticed that there were some pedestrians in the bicycle lane. There's actually a mum on her scooter and her child on a skateboard using the bicycle lane as well. This is not like e-scooters or anything like that, so they were relatively slow. And yeah, a little bit annoying because as a cyclist, what that means is to overtake, you've got to now access the adjacent live stream. And yeah, can understand why that would be a little bit precarious. Now, dooring is a significant issue, and unfortunately it's happened to a lot of us as cyclists and can have some very, very serious consequences, as I'm sure you could all appreciate. The average door swings out to about 1.2 meters. So from there to there, about 1.2 meters. Ironically, that is also generally the width of our bicycle lanes. So there you go. How about that? So it basically gives cyclists no room for escape, because that's where they've been told to ride, and that's where the hazard completely inhabits. So where we were looking at all our protected bicycle lane facilities, where you have the separator, what we tend to recommend is if you can make the separator width 1.2 meters, you've virtually eliminated the risk of any dooring. The narrower that you bring that separator, the more and more that you increase that risk, but 1.2 is what you should be aiming for. Got a video here of Ken riding. We were riding together, and this is on the 360-degree camera, and I've just turned it around so it's facing backwards. And this was Ken cycling along, and was very lucky to avoid that open door. It's another shot of that there. But you can see how quickly that could have turned out, to be quite a serious incident, either Ken riding into that door itself or, as they're evading, potentially riding into the live traffic stream and colliding with traffic in that scene. So anyway, just wanted to give you some examples of what you'd be looking out for and why dooring is such a risk there. There was a bit of a study done probably about 10 years ago now of where cycling dooring collisions are occurring. It's one of those studies that I'm not 100% sure was required, but that's okay. I can still talk about it. Basically, what it said was our dominant collisions are occurring on the driver's side, about 75%. And that's not surprising, given that the majority of our bicycle lanes are adjacent that driver's side. So that is basically where cyclists are predominantly riding. And also, if there's a parked vehicle, there is a driver. So you definitely know that that door is going to open. So it's not surprising to see that. But I suppose what is perhaps a little unexpected is seeing, 1 in 4 on the passenger side of things. And where this may be occurring is, if you can imagine, a vehicle, maybe it's in the CBD or something like that, it's a signalized intersection, and the passengers, they just decide, yep, this is my stop, this is where I want to get out, or I'm just dropping you off, and this is where you get out, and they just open up the door and don't think about any of their surroundings, and that's where a cyclist could be. So it is relatively high numbers, I guess, to have 1 in 4 involved in that side of the vehicle, but certainly the majority are on the driver's side. We've just included this in case you are doing any kind of options assessments as part of your cycling projects, as what type of treatments could be appropriate or what's unlikely to be appropriate. Along this kind of column here, we've got, if it's what is the strategic function of the network? Is it, buses, or is it cyclists? Is it freight? Whatever it is. And then along this table here, this axis, I guess you'd call it, what kind of treatment could you be looking at investigating? Once again, I wouldn't say it's got a lot of detail in there. It's just hopefully thinking about some of your, give you a bit of information as to what you could be investigating, and, what would unlikely be appropriate. So just as an example, if you are on a bicycle priority route, relocating cyclists is unlikely to be an appropriate thing to be looking at. Marissa.
Max, a really important question we just got in, and probably something we failed to mention. There's no Wallies.
Oh, no.
Today. I think
I'm so sorry.
I think some people are missing Wally.
I need to create a little reminder for myself.
Prompt for us at the start. Yeah.
No, there's no Wally. I'm sorry
about
that.
No Wallies today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's thanks for the prompt, Callan. But there are no Wallies today. Hopefully, I think he'll be back next module, Max.
Yeah, next module Wally will be there, but there's no Wally today because we've got an assignment today.
Yeah.
Let's give a prize out to that person. Keeping me honest.
Yes. Just a question. What is an unknown driver's side door? 7%.
Oh, so I think that's going back here. Basically, so this study was conducted using police reports, and some of the police reports said it was the driver door or it was the rear driver side door. Some police reports just said it was on the right-hand side of the vehicle, which is why it's unknown, but we know it's on that side. So that's just where that terminology came from. Okay, now I wanted to show this as a little bit of an example. This is, a relatively common setup for our on-road bicycle lanes, but the difference with this treatment is it's a little bit difficult to see with the photo, but there's just like a green stripe. You can see that section there is only colored green. It's not the whole width of the bicycle lane. And the reason being, this was used as a trial to see if cyclists would ride further away from the dooring zone. So they wanted to see if we put the stripe not center of the bike lane or not the entire bike lane, we deliberately offset it, will cyclists change their positioning? Ironically, that does push them closer to the live traffic lane and the live light rail or tram, which is, a really big concern. But this went ahead as a trial. And in terms of the evaluation, it was seen that cyclists did shift their behavior. So they did actually position themselves closer to the carriageway. It was about between 160 mil to 280 mil. So like you're not significant amount, but no longer just riding directly in the middle. About 75% of cyclists that regularly rode through this and surveyed as part of this trial, 75% said that they felt more comfortable with this as opposed to what was there before, which was no green stripe, which is quite significant. Now, I'm personally don't really advocate for this type of thing because I don't think that we're going to see significant reductions in the level of trauma if you're just doing little green stripes. And also we're not going to see significant uptakes in cycling if we're just doing lines and pavement marking. I don't see lines and pavement marking as infrastructure per se. It's just supplementary. So, but in saying that, that is the outcome of that analysis and that evaluation, and that is still installed there on this road today. And that was done about 8 years ago now. So a little bit interesting, but I think one of the main takeaways that I have from that is this is an actual example where the road authority has said, we want to get cyclists further away from the dooring zone. So we're going to install this green stripe, even if that means they are closer to the live traffic lane and the live tram line. Like that is how much they have considered the risk of dooring. Catherine.
Yes, I was just going to add to that. I think it is just a sign of how people feel when they're riding close to parked vehicles, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Is the risk of dooring. Just out of interest, what's the width of that facility? Do you know? Is it typically wider than minimum? It looks a bit wider than.
It does. I would think it's probably 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 maybe. I don't think it's significantly wide.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And just something to add about the challenges of rolling out on-road cycling facilities and removing on-street parking. And I guess that the feeling that the community have around that, especially businesses where they feel like it's a huge loss of revenue when you're removing on-street parking and you're putting in a separated cycle facility, and just some ideas of how to get around that, because it is a tricky one, because people just think you're taking business away. But yeah, there's lots of examples out there of the benefits of having more cyclists cycle by, feeling safer, and ultimately leading to business on the doorstep.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid question, and it is certainly an argument that comes up frequently. And my suggestion is purely just rely on evidence and what research is saying. And there was a PhD candidate who completed their thesis on this specific topic of how businesses may or may not be affected by protected bicycle lanes. And yeah, it did indicate that whilst, a vehicle here, they may park there and spend money at one shop, 6 cyclists can fit within that space. And if they are all spending, just a small portion of that same amount of money, and they're turning over in a higher frequency, they're likely to spend, likely to have a better outcome for that business. And that's only from the financial side. But if you think of it from the, sustainability side, we're getting much more people using equipment that is not reliant on fossil fuels, so much more environmentally friendly, and also just creates a streetscape that is much more friendly. And it feels nicer to be around places where you don't just have rows and rows of parked cars, and instead you do have the ability for people to stop and enjoy their cycling. But yeah, my advice there is really just relying on literature and having those open conversations with your business owners in those scenarios, and what are the alternatives for them and their customers to access that space, because not everyone will ride a bike, so just trying to have that open dialogue.
I guess it's the added benefits to the alfresco dining too, isn't it? It's always nice not having to sit next to a parked vehicle when you're eating your lunch and having your coffee.
That's much right. More, not a great smell.
No. Cheers, Max.
That's right.
Max, is there an alternative to the Omni Group green treatment? It can be expensive and has maintenance issues. So it's just a question around, are there any councils that have used an alternative non-sleeped green treatment?
I might let any other councils answer that one because I don't want to be seen to favouring any suppliers just as a consultant. So whenever we do designs or anything like that, we just say install a green pavement marking. We don't go with any specific product. So yeah, any other LGAs that have specific maintenance burdens associated with specific products, welcome to share that in the chat.
Great, thanks.
Another example, this one is in New Zealand, in Hastings, and it's just another idea for on-road bicycle lane. And it's just got these dotted lines for the cyclists, and it's not actually for cyclists to ride on top on, as we can see in this photo. It's basically just in lieu of having to paint the entire bicycle lane green. So rather than just fill in this entire area green, Hastings, the council over there, decided to try these little stripes. An evaluation has not been done as far as I'm aware. I wouldn't expect this is overly effective though, because it may be missed. But anyway, just wanted to show you some examples of what has been trialed in that space. Now, what we do know provides a greater level of safety. If you are doing on-road facilities and you cannot do the protected bicycle lanes, is providing chevrons or buffers. A double chevron, which is what we're seeing here, is where you've got painted markings both adjacent the live traffic stream and adjacent the dooring zone. So this is, takes up a relatively large space for the bicycle lane, but it does mean that if a door is opening, there's a lot of extra room for a cyclist to be able to move around and avoid that collision. Similarly, if motorists are veering out of their lane, there's that extra buffer there for in between the traffic stream and the bicycle lane, so you can hopefully mitigate the risk of the collision there. We've included just some figures there in case you were interested in these types of facilities, but generally you'd want to be looking for 600 mil width for these type of chevron separators. But once again, if you can fit in a larger width, that would be great. So that's the double chevron. You may be getting into spaces where you're even more constrained and you have to think about, I can only do a chevron on one side of the bicycle lane, and it can either be on the parking lane side, as is shown here, or the traffic lane side. Now, the way that guidance currently reads and suggests when you would be doing either is if this parking is metered or there's time restrictions, that would then infer that you've got a relatively high level of turnover. So say there's 2 hour parking, you know that every 2 hours you're going to have a new vehicle and doors opening up. So in those instances, that's when you may prioritize having the buffer situated on the parking lane side to help reduce the risk of dooring. Once again, just some photos there of, some figures there of those widths and things like that. Where those parking restrictions may not exist, that is where you may place the chevron buffer width there on the adjacent traffic lane side. Now, personally, anecdotally, I'm always much more scared of a door opening than a vehicle kind of traveling into the bicycle lane. So I tend to favor always going for the buffer zone on the dooring side, but that's just my own bias, and I do reflect on what literature is saying, and instead, you know, that's what we're currently being advised, which is if there is a high turnover of traffic, that's when you'd prioritize for the chevron on the dooring on the parking lane side. But if there's no time restrictions, then that's where you'd have something like this. All right. Exclusive bike lanes have been, you know, within our standards and guidelines for a few decades now. And I do think that we should start thinking that, well, if we are going to allocate a specific section of our mid-block to cyclists, then why can't we actually create some degree of protection to help reduce the risk of motorists entering that space, and also give cyclists an improved you know, feeling that they've got this separated space. So yeah, generally exclusive bike lanes, or, you know, just a bike lane that's been installed or is being proposed as part of a new highway project or things like that, will just be a solid line. And I think we should be starting to think about, well, if we're willing to include that as part of our cross section, then we should be starting to look at, well, maybe we should be protecting this facility as well, and not just saying a line is good enough. These wide curbside bike lanes are terrible, and I don't like them at all, and I don't think we should be doing them. So it's this idea of, you've got like a ... with a bicycle symbol, and then 200 meters later there's another ... with a bicycle symbol, but that space in between, there's just nothing. It's just a wide traffic lane. And in this particular photo, this is an 80km/h speed limit. Vehicles travel faster, and it's just such a bad experience as a cyclist. As you can see also the hill there, cyclists are really working hard to get up that hill, and there's just very limited clearance from the adjacent traffic stream. And this is not one that I advocate for at all. And I think, yeah, it is still within our standards. It's within the Australian standards for bicycle facilities, but not a good treatment. If you are in these higher volume and higher speed environments, that's really where you'd be looking to get cyclists off the road, because it's not safe for them to try and be that close to the carriageway. Now, as I mentioned the previous module, the Global Street Design Guide, wonderful resource. This is just a snapshot of some of the, you know, work that's done in there, where they actually define all of these different treatments. They may use slightly different language, but principles are the same. And they also provide specific criteria. So you can see there's safety, comfort, space, cost associated with protected or bidirectional or a raised track. And it's a wonderful resource. So once again, if you are in the options analysis side of things and looking at different ways you can construct your cycling corridors, I strongly recommend getting into this. Before I get stuck into the next section, I'll just touch base with Catherine and Marissa and see if there's any questions while I get a drink of water.
You go first, Catherine. You're on. Oh.
So I just put myself on mute. Sorry, thanks, Marissa. Yes, so there was a query there around on cycle lanes and I guess angled bays, or, you know, and my view on this is we encourage cycle lanes next to parallel bays and discourage cycle lanes behind angled bays. But yeah, just one for discussion, Max.
Yeah, so I agree. Angled bays are certainly quite a high risk, because, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, as a vehicle is reversing out of the angled bay, they tend to just keep popping out and popping out and popping out, and that's when they enter the bicycle lane, and their sight lines are just shocking. So it is a very difficult space. But with the parallel parking bays option, that's where they're within the dooring zone. So there's also there's that risk as well. So they're both not great options. In other words, my only consideration there is if you were redesigning an avenue or a strip shopping, street, and perhaps you've already got the angled bays, and the width of that, and that's where your bicycle lane is currently. Could you reconfigure this width to a narrow parking lane and then a buffer and then a bicycle lane? Because I feel like that would probably have a better outcome, where you've got that additional buffer there than having an angled parking bay.
Tend to agree. And I guess that also just a point around, would you encourage vehicles to be reversing into those bays only so that they have better sight lines of the on-road facility?
Yeah, I don't really know the research behind this, but my gut says no, because I just feel like that's a weird thing to do. Are you aware of any?
I believe it has been done in certain areas, but I tend to agree with you, Max. Like I certainly wouldn't be doing that as an option, well, as a motorist anyway. Reversing into an angled bay. But I've seen it done, and I think compliance, I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? Compliance around that. If it's signed as reverse in only, how does that get monitored? Just some other things while we've got you. Is there any implication that road speeds would have on the implementation of barriers due to vehicles potentially hitting them? For example, speeds over 60.
Right. Yeah, okay. Traditionally, the way that has been looked at, going way back, was the idea of clear zones and things like that. But now you would consider, if you were developing a new highway in a greenfield site, what are the risks of an errant vehicle, striking any of the roadside area? Typically, you'd have utility poles or trees or things like that. That would be the predominant thing. But if it is in fact a bicycle lane or something like that in the adjacent roadside area, that's when you could look at installing barrier systems to help reduce the risk of that errant vehicle. I'm not aware of a specific metric or speed zone where that would be, stipulated that is required as part of the design. I think it's generally just taken as part of, if you're conducting road safety audits and things like that as part of your design process, that's where that information might get picked up.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Max. Just an observation of a photo from a few slides back where the curb and footpath were a similar colour to the surface of the bike lane. Is there any necessity for contrasting colours between a bike lane and an abutting curb?
I'm not sure if it was this photo, but I think it's good practice to do so. Certainly where we tend to only use, the contrasting colouring where it is the conflict point. So that's where that green pavement term has come up. It's been referred to as conflict paint because that's generally only where it's been used. But I'm actually a fan of using it, a little bit more liberally. I think the conflict paint can be used, as you suggested there, just consistently to say this is the bicycle lane, or it can be used as wayfinding. If, say this section here, this is where cyclists get off the road, you can just have this ramp coloured in green, so it's a little bit clearer that that's where cyclists go. But once again, that's just a jurisdictional thing, and there's not really solid guidance for that.
Yeah, and I guess it just depends on the scenario, doesn't it? What you're dealing with, what conflict points you have. And just a question around the content moving forward. Do we cover off on cycle lanes and exit ramps and on ramps?
We've got In today's one, we've got a slip lane example, but not like an interchange, but
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
similar kind of
Okay.
idea.
Thank you, Max. Cheers.
No worries. All right. So when we're thinking of mixing traffic, actually, I said that was today's topic, so that's going to be tomorrow, next Wednesday. Sorry, I was getting my days confused. When we think about mixing traffic, this is scenarios where vehicle speeds are low enough that we feel comfortable for cyclists to ride in the middle of the traffic lane, basically treat themselves like any other vehicle, and then claim the lane, as it's referred to. Now, the photo that I'm showing here is actually not an example of mixed traffic, but a perfect example of where this could be implemented. A little bit difficult to see, but right down the end there is that little ... bicycle lane treatment, a wide curbside lane, which effectively means that the cyclist needs to ride exactly where this person is riding, adjacent to the dooring zone. And motorists do try and squeeze past in these really, really narrow sections. So you just do not have a lot of space in this specific environment to be able to cater for, you know, a parking lane, a traffic lane, and a bicycle lane. There's just no way. This is a residential zone. And it's just a perfect example of where we could say, well, we know we don't have all the space for all of those uses. So are we going to get rid of the parking lane? Probably not. It's going to be incredibly difficult, but maybe we can instead advocate for cyclists taking a more central position and bringing down vehicle speeds through the use of local area traffic management treatments, and yeah, making it a much more comfortable experience for cyclists. Now, what we talk about for different treatments in different speed zones, this is kind of used as a bit of a guide where if we've got operating speeds less than 40 kilometers per hour, that's where that lane sharing that I was just suggesting there may be appropriate. If we're in the 40 to 60 kilometer per hour mark, that's where we're looking at protected bicycle lanes and separating cyclists away from the live traffic lane. Anything above that mark is really where we want to be looking at off-road facilities. So for those that have done any safe system training or road safety training, we do know that cyclists are considered vulnerable road users, and they are, you know, at a great risk of fatal or serious injuries at relatively low speeds because they do not have the same safety features as vehicles, as you can appreciate. So I'll just do a quick little graph here. If I've got along the y-axis there, the probability of a fatality, and along the x-axis, I've got the speed of a vehicle. So speed of the vehicle versus the probability of a cyclist being killed. The way that this graph kind of looks is something like this. Might be a little bit dramatic there, but looks relatively like that. And at this point here, you can see things get exponentially worse for cyclists. It's like low risk, low risk, low risk. And then it just goes, wow, this is a significant point. So that speed that we refer to as is at the 30 kilometer per hour mark. So another way of saying that is we know that as vehicle speeds and collisions with cyclists occur at 30 or above, the risk of a fatality is greatly exacerbated. So we really want to try and reduce those conflict points to at 30 kilometers or below. The reason I'm mentioning that is because that may be a quiz question. I'm not too sure, but it could be. The way that we demarcate our lane sharing is through the use of these little features, which are referred to as sharrows. stands for shared arrows. And it is basically a treatment that says to cyclists, you can now claim the traffic lane, and says to motorists, you now have to share this traffic lane with cyclists. Unfortunately, not everyone fully understands what that is. Just as a bit of an anecdote, they recently installed this kind of adjacent where I grew up, and my mum gave me a call and asked me what these funny little symbols are. So I got to do a bit of bicycle infrastructure treatment talking with mum, which was good. But yeah, it relatively understood, but that is generally how we communicate that messaging to both motorists and to cyclists. It's not regulatory though, so yeah, that's the downside of things. You suppose if you can issue fines if motorists are failing to share that, or cyclists are still riding in the curbside, it's just indicative. So here's an example of one that is being installed, and these are dotted throughout this section here. This is actually within a 30km/h speed zone, so quite appropriate. And as you can see, there's lots of local area traffic management treatments, or those speed humps being used just to bring vehicle speeds down. So it's not just a sign saying 30, it's the actual treatments helping to reinforce that. Another example of this is in a regional town here in Victoria, in Warrnambool. They're doing wonderful things over there, where they've got a 30km/h kind of CBD section. And as you can see, it's, they've got their angled parking bays there, and they could have reconfigured the entire street to build protected bicycle lanes. But they thought, you know what, if I just do a 30 and I bring cyclists right into the middle of the traffic lane, that should provide safe provisions for cyclists, and yeah, it's working very well there. This one is just a photo of a Sharrow flower in Portland, Oregon. I went to Portland just a couple months ago, and they've got some wonderful cycling infrastructure there. And they're actually a really, really big fan of these Sharrows. They use them a lot. They use a lot of their local or residential network as the cycling corridors, and they leave all the arterial stuff to, general traffic. So that's just the way that they kind of prioritize their movements there. Now, where you wouldn't want to install this, I'll throw this out for the group as well. And any idea why you might not be recommending the Sharrows in this specific scenario? Yes, tram tracks. That's a big no-no. Unfortunately, the tram track gaps are wide enough to be able to clip a cyclist's tires or catch a cyclist's tires, meaning this Sharrow is kind of indicating that cyclists should get across there, at a clear risk of catching your tires in those tracks and then falling over. So yeah, you don't want to be recommending that. I can confirm that they only lasted, I think, about 3 weeks before they got scrubbed off because the cycling community complained to council about those ones. Where you are looking at implementing your Sharrows, as I mentioned before, you want to be doing this in combination with local area traffic management treatments. For those that work within councils, you're probably incredibly up to detail with all of this information, but you want to create slow points, you want to create vertical deflection or speed humps or one-way areas, just so vehicles are slowing down. It's not just the sign, there's physical infrastructure there forcing vehicles to slow down. I really like this one as an example because motorists, they've only got this one lane at a time business occurring to get over that little slow point thing there, whereas cyclists, they get a nice bypass, so they don't need to worry about that, and they've got a nice continued journey through here. Similarly, another example of this bypass treatment being utilized. So cyclists are able to ride around that feature there, and we're only focused on slowing down general traffic. The other benefit of having all these features as well is it might also move some of that traffic that we're doing rat runs or, traveling through residential streets. It might get them back onto the arterial network, which is where you want to see that movement anyway. Now, another example of a local area traffic management treatment is this idea of like doing partial road closures. It's a little bit difficult to see from this angle here. This is like the perspective of the cyclist. So I'll take you to an aerial view of this site. And shown in this orange arrow is if a motorist did want to continue their journey south, they would be forced to perform this kind of quite circuitous journey, which is quite unattractive. And this is a local street, so it's not really meant to have that throughput function. Cyclists, however, would get to ride straight through that area. So they are not broken up by that facility. Now, on one hand, one of the disbenefits with this design is you've basically created two conflict points that were not there before. If this was just a straight through for vehicles, then they wouldn't have to worry about doing that. So that's, I suppose, one of the disadvantages. But you could look at, blocking off this access here. So motorists go further and further and further along, and maybe it takes them out to an arterial road and kind of really sends that message that you shouldn't be trying to get through here. This is not a through residential connection. But another way that you can do this is through a full closure. And this is along the same street, just a little bit further down. Once again, I'll show you on the aerial, where cyclists are able to continue southbound in that direction. So that was all open for them. Whereas motorists completely blocked off and they have to turn around and go and find an arterial road because there's just no through access for them at all. So just wanted to reiterate, if you are proposing sharrows, or you've got a sharrow network, very appropriate in residential local streets. You want low traffic volume, you want low speeds, and you want to make it difficult for vehicles to be able to get in and out of there, because it's not about their access. It's about, creating safe journeys for cyclists and limiting their interaction with vehicles there. That is the end of the content for today. I was going to go through the assignment, but I will check in with Marissa and Catherine for any further questions.
Yeah, Max, with that slide, just a question. Isn't this just increasing exposure to cyclists being struck?
Yes. This one does, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No other questions for me, Catherine?
Yes, just one on sharrows, Max, and just some thoughts around where we are putting those sharrows on the road environment. Do you think that where there aren't sharrows, it's promoting the message that cyclists shouldn't be on the road because the sharrow is not there?
Yeah, right. That's a good question. I don't really have an answer for that. I think that's probably warrants some type of behavioral study to see how motorists actually react to two similar environments, one with a sharrow, one with not. Yeah. I should also preface with that about 3 or 4 months ago, there was another PhD completed in North America that actually suggested sharrows don't do anything, and they don't change the level of safety for cyclists or change any behavior for motorists. The reason that we're still included in this course is because that specific PhD was focused on, I think it was Boston in Massachusetts, I could be wrong, but it was focused on one specific scenario, and it said that, as part of this, we've only looked at this specific road context, and we've only considered users within this specific area. So it may not necessarily represent a global attitude, but there is a possibility that, you know, sharrows are not as effective as what our guides are suggesting. The reason, as I said, that we are teaching it is because they are proliferated across networks across the globe. So it's part of Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, you know, Europe, America, Canada. It's used very, very widely, and it is still within all our guidelines. So that's why it's in this course.
Yeah, I certainly see sharrows as, you know, designs that we see as also like wayfinding treatments to, you know, position cyclists within a roundabout, or like directing them to a more safer facility as well. So
yeah,
just some thoughts there. Just any thoughts on speed limit reduction without local area traffic management?
I wouldn't recommend it, because it's very likely that you'll have motorists just continuing to operate in the speed that they are used to. So if you're trying to create a reduction, you need to be creating an environment that matches that reduction.
Yeah, I agree. And just a question, in the mixed traffic design slide, what is the impact of placing the cycle lanes on the inside and allowing traffic to flow, and only be aware on when the cyclist is stopping to enter the shop frontage areas or lanes?
Oh, I'm not sure. Do you remember which slide that was, Catherine?
No, not particularly. Maybe if Kaylin can. 75. Thank you.
Oh, excellent.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, and issues with accessing the shop front for motorists?
So what is the impact of placing the cycle lanes on the inside and allowing traffic to flow, and only be aware on when the cyclist is stopping to enter the shop frontage areas or lanes?
Yeah, so I suppose, as I showed in the next example of this, if you were able to do the full closure and get motorists not conflicting with cyclists at all, that would be a much better approach. I just wanted to include this as an example of, you know, a partial closure that's been used here, and then further along you've got the full closure. It is still a risk. Yeah, I think that was noted by someone else as well.
Yeah. Does the width of the safety buffer between 3-lane and separated cycle lane proportional to operating speed of the vehicle?
Yes, there will be different buffer widths recommended depending on the operating speeds, but it's also like your bicycle lane widths will get wider if it was in a higher speed environment.
Yeah.
But as I was showing before, we're much more strongly encouraging those higher speed environments. Let's bring cyclists off-road altogether, or protected bicycle lanes, rather than just making things a little bit wider.
Thank you, Max. That's all I have.
Excellent. I'll go through the assignment, Marissa, and then I'll end with any of those final.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, cool. So on the LMS, hopefully everyone's got access to this now, and this looks familiar. Under Module 2, once again, you'll see another 360-degree video. We'll get you to watch that before our next session on Wednesday. So once again, just need to click that. It'll take you to a YouTube site and you can watch the 360. You'll get an example of an on-road facility riding next to the dooring zone versus riding in a protected bicycle lane. So you'll get to, if you've never ridden at either of those facilities, you'll get to see what it feels like. But you'll also need to complete Module 2. Now, this is actually due Tuesday, the 7th of November. So you've got a couple of weeks. And And I just wanted to go through this assignment to make sure everyone is aware of what's involved. So we've got a PDF document as well as a Word document. And I've got both of these documents already open, so I'm not going to worry about downloading them. But if you click on them, that will download them for you. And the instructions are, for step 1, you'll need to download and review the Module 2 design review file. That's the PDF, okay? So if I open up the PDF looks like this. It is Launceston Route, York Street concept plan. There is a disclaimer here at the top left that says the design has been provided for training purposes. Please don't talk to Launceston City Council about this or write to an MP or anything like that, because it's just for this training course. So don't get too emotional if you know this specific site very well. But if you don't know it, that's also completely okay. So it's only 4 sheets. For those that have never read design plans before, you know, we're happy to help you out here, but it's basically just a legend that shows what all the different colors mean. You'll need to go through each of those sheets and have a look at what is kind of being proposed. So it just takes you along that alignment of York Street, okay? So that was step 1. Step number 2 is review the existing conditions of the site using Google Street View, and we just provided a link to it there. So if you click on that link, it will take you to York Street in Launceston, and you can just do a quick up and down just to have a look at what the existing traffic conditions look like. We'll get you to fill out this table below and then save and upload this document to the LMS. So you'll put in your name, and then we just need these responses to the questions. Question 1 is, how does the existing environment cater for cyclists? So you'll need to look at the street view and just dot point, what are the existing cycling facilities, and, you know, what would that imply? We don't need long paragraph answers. We're very, very happy for things to be short and sweet. The next question is, how does the design cater for cyclists? Now, what we're really looking for here is that you are using the terminology that we have been talking about in Module 1 and Module 2 today. So when we're mostly scoring based on the correct jargon being used. So please make sure that you refer to those module slides and ensure that your answers match that language. Number 3 is where you get to be a little bit creative and you get to redesign things. So it's saying, what treatments or changes in the design could you recommend to improve the safety for cyclists? We've also highlighted that we only want you to list 3. So we often get, you know, a dozen or so different treatments, but we want you to pick what would be the 3 best things that you could change about the design to make things safer for cyclists. Once you've completed all that, in your LMS, you'll be able to go down to the bottom. Mine looks different to yours because got a different teacher. But there'll be a button there that says upload assignment, and you just click on that. You attach that, and then we get an email saying that you've attached your assignments, and we will be marking that and providing feedback. So all of the assignments and all the feedback is done through this, not via email or anything like that. But if you are having any issues, please just reach out. Any questions on that?
I'll just note the due date is actually the 24th of October. Max, I think you've got the November.
Oh no,
yeah,
that's my fault.
That's all right. Same
I
thing.
apologize.
Just, on the October, it is, the due date does say the 24th. So yeah, a couple of people were quick to pick that one up. So it is the 24th, everyone. So next week. Sorry. Yes, next Tuesday.
No worries. And that assignment, if it's taking you longer than 20 minutes,
yeah,
that's too long. So just give us a call. We'll talk you through it, because we don't want you to spend lots and lots of time on this.
Yeah. Max, is there any data to say that sharrows do improve cycling safety?
So as I mentioned before, it is like, I assume at one stage there was literature completed to suggest that shower are effective, which is why guidelines around the world have adopted that approach. I can't think of any specific papers at the top of my head. But yeah, I would imagine that there is some research that suggests that they were a good idea. Yep.
Don't have any other questions, Catherine? Anything?
No, all good, all covered.
Good.
Excellent. So, well, I've given you a couple minutes now to get started into the assignment. Thank you, everyone, for your enthusiasm. At the start of next module, if you come just a few minutes early, we'll do trivia again. I love trivia, love giving out some prizes. So make sure you log on early and, yeah, enjoy your weekend. Thanks very much for getting involved.
Thanks for
Thanks,
joining,
everyone. Thank you. Enjoy your weekend. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.